Good evening. In less than 24 hours from now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi would have landed in Israel. Not only will he be the first Indian Prime Minister ever to do so, but also the first to so clearly dehyphenate Israel and Palestine and drop what experts say has been the hypocrisy of Indian foreign policy makers. On Gravitas tonight, as we look at the significance of the visit and the agenda, we also ask what makes this relationship so special. How does this partnership benefit India, and how has Israel made such strides in defense and counter-terrorism? What explains its keen interest in strengthening ties with India? I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. The headlines first. China responds to Defence Minister Arun Jaitley's remarks, says the China of today is also different from the China of 1962. Rhetoric precedes diplomacy as the Sikkim standoff continues. Qatar Foreign Minister reaches Kuwait as the 48-hour deadline set by Arab nations looms over Doha. Experts say most demands will be rejected, even as Donald Trump calls Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi, reiterating the importance of stopping terror financing. American warship USS Stedham sails close to the Triton Island claimed by China. Beijing calls it a provocation. President Xi and Trump speak over the phone, but no indication that the incident was discussed. America courts Pakistan days after blacklisting global terrorist Syed Salahuddin. A delegation led by Senator John McCain visits Islamabad, raises Kashmir again. And President Emmanuel Macron says he will end France's state of emergency later this year, proposes to cut the strength of the country's parliament by a third in a rare address to both houses. On 17 September 1950, India officially recognized Israel, but it took 4 decades to establish diplomatic ties. On Wednesday, Narendra Modi will be the first Indian Prime Minister to visit the country. Here's a look at how the relationship developed from small beginnings, ideological considerations, and the Cold War, then Kargil, and today, when the India-Israel partnership is coming out in the open.
He was perhaps the world's most famous general. Epitomized by his eye patch, Moshe Dayan as defense minister led Israel to victory over 5 Arab armies during the 1967 Six-Day War. More to the point, he visited India secretly in 1977 during the Junta government to push for full diplomatic relations, which happened, but only 11 years after his death. India and Israel got freedom from the British within 8 months of each other, but it took more than 4 decades before formal ties were established. In those early years, India led the non-allied movement and had close ties with the Arab world and former Soviet Union. Israel was allied to the US and Western Europe. Even after 1992, when India and Israel established full diplomatic relations, there was a tendency to keep it low-key, so as to not antagonize Arab states where thousands of Indian labor were employed, and not to destabilize India's independence on Arab oil. Israeli officials said, and I quote, "India was happy to engage intimately in private, but hesitant to acknowledge the relationship in public." Indian diplomats say relations transformed after the Kargil War. Israel rushed supplies of mortar ammunition and laser-guided missiles that were fitted on the IAF's Mirage fighters to take out Pakistani bunkers. Israel also speeded up delivery of Heron and Searcher UAVs for surveillance and reconnaissance. From defense, ties have now broadened to cover agriculture, where drip irrigation has helped to raise yields of fruit and vegetables. India is learning from Israel wastewater treatment and water management. Diplomatically, India opted to remain neutral at the UN Human Rights Commission in 2015, when members voted to approve the Gaza Commission of Inquiry report. It was the first time India did not vote in favor of the Palestinians. Officially, however, India still supports Palestinian aspirations for an independent state living peacefully alongside Israel. Bureau Report, WION.
And joining us this evening on Gravitas from Israel, we have Herb Keenon. He is the diplomatic correspondent of Jerusalem Post. Remember, WION is reporting with the Jerusalem Post on the Modi visit. We also have with me in the studio Reuben Israel. He's a book publisher. He's someone who's always lived in India. Good evening and thank you both for joining us. Herb, let me start with you. How significant is this visit by the Prime Minister of India? How does the media, how does the government in Israel see it?
अभी मुझे पैचअप नहीं किया
covering diplomacy here for almost 20 years. And outside of visits by the American president, I haven't seen this much excitement in a long time.
There are also reports which say that Trump's instability in the U.S. means that Israel should pivot towards India. That was one of the headlines in an Israeli newspaper. Is that a factor according to you?
No, I think that's kind of overstated. The relationship, I mean, regardless of President Trump's situation domestically, the relationship with Israel is extremely strong. Israel sees that as the main strategic pillar. The relationship with India isn't coming to replace a relationship with the U.S. I think it's coming to supplement Israel's relationships with other countries in the world, which, with the exception of Europe, are getting better.
And does the personal rapport between the two leaders play a part?
I think it helps. Look, I don't think, I mean, chemistry is important. I don't think that the reason why India and Israel are doing as well as they're doing right now is necessarily because the two men have a great chemistry, which apparently they do. I think it's rather because they're both kind of coming from the same overall worldview. They see the world kind of through the nationalistic coup party. Modi's coming from a nationalist Hindi party. So they kind of see the world in similar vein. I think that's what's binding their relationship more than a personal rapport, which they obviously do have.
Reuben, you've seen this relationship take shape over the past many decades. Do you believe that they're more than made up for in the last 25 years of what they lost or they missed in 4 decades of no ties?
Well, even in the last 25 years, there has been some hesitation about really coming together because there are all these other angles to be seen about our relationship with the Middle East, with the Arab countries in the Middle East. But yes, a lot of ground has been covered.
And do you see this? How do you see this going forward with the Indian Prime Minister? What sort of a statement do you think this makes?
It's a very positive statement, and it means that we recognize Israel as a 100% partner now. So I think it'll do good for business. It'll do good for our political relations and our cultural relations.
Sure, we'll talk about culture in a bit, and you spoke about business. Defense, remember, has been the mainstay of this relationship. The India-Israel Defense Cooperation is expected to see a major leap forward during Prime Minister Modi's visit. Here's a look at the quiet inroads Israeli military equipment has made into the Indian armed forces.
Army, Navy and Air Force have raised, trained and maintained specialized commando units for a range of operations including surgical strikes, anti-hijacking and hostage rescue, among others. Apart from their intensive training, they have something else in common. They're all armed with the Israeli Tavor assault rifle. Israeli weapons and systems have been making a quiet but steady entry into the armed forces for quite some years. The Tavor came into use around 2006 after modifications and is now being made in India. The Galil, Negev and the B-300 rocket launchers are some of the other Israeli weapons used by India's commando units. The Indian Air Force has 6 Israeli Falcon AWACS systems deployed on the IL-76 aircraft. These can act as airborne commando posts and with its powerful radars detect enemy missiles and aircraft over 500-kilometer range. The long-range surface-to-air missile system is based on the Israeli Barak 8 and is for use on naval ships and from land. The missiles are ideal for defense against enemy aircraft and missiles and UAVs at a distance of 100 kilometers. India has purchased a number of Heron and Searcher UAVs for surveillance and reconnaissance. It has also bought up the Harpy drone, which can be used to destroy enemy targets. The army is acquiring more than 8,000 Spike anti-tank guided missiles and 320 launchers for use by infantry battalions. Leading Israeli weapons developers and manufacturers are tying up with the Indian private sector companies in joint ventures. Rafael, for instance, has tied up with India's Reliance Defense and the Kalyani Group to make in India. Adani Enterprises and Israel's Elbit are joining hands to make unmanned aerial vehicles in India. Other Indian firms like Taneja Aerospace and Dynamatic Technologies are tying up with Israel Aerospace Industries. Given the slow pace of indigenization in India, the government is evidently hoping the Israeli connection with the private sector will speed up Make in India. Bureau Report, WION.
A study of the Indian and Israeli militaries shows many areas where they converge. Both are regarded as highly professional and highly trained. They are seen as innovative in thinking and approach. India has fought 5 wars since independence. Israel has fought around 12. 70 years after independence, neither country's borders are secure. Both militaries remain operationally deployed. Terrorism is a major challenge for both countries, and these are the areas of common interest. I'm told we also have with us retired Brigadier General Shlomo Brom from Jerusalem and T.R. Kakkar, former Director General of the NSG. Good evening to both of you. Keenan, if I could come back to you. The Jerusalem Post ran a story today on major defense deals being on the agenda. What specifically do we expect on this visit? Tell us more. Keenan, if you can hear me, I want to ask you what sort of defense deals in particular do we expect to be signed on the Indian Prime Minister during the Indian Prime Minister's visit? We'll try and reconnect with him. If I could come to T.R. Kakkar. Mr. Kakkar, how is Israel able to follow this zero-tolerance policy towards terrorists? What in their legislation allows for this country to follow a policy like this, and what is it that India can take away from there?
First of all, we must congratulate our Prime Minister for taking a very bold step of visiting for the first time, first time by any Prime Minister. Now, having said that, you see, as far as India is concerned, the Indian defense system is concerned, we are in touch practically with the Israeli authorities for a long time now. It is only now that something is officially being recognized that we are, and all that was not happening because we didn't want to really annoy a section of our own people and the Arab world. Now, having said that, let me tell you that we have a lot to learn from them. We have a lot to take from them, and they have to similarly learn from us. We are managing one of the longest borders, both with China and with Pakistan particularly. Now, so is the Israel. Israel is very successfully managing their own border fencing, etc. We have to learn from them how they use the various devices, how they counter terrorism, and how best India can take equipment from them equipment from them which will help them to fight terrorism. I know the conditions are quite different, the situations are quite different in their country and in our country because of various combinations, yet there is a lot to learn from them. And as it is, I think we have a lot of equipment taken from them. Joint ventures that we are entering into, we are going to enter into joint ventures with them of manufacturing a couple of missiles, harpoons, unarmed vehicles, unmanned vehicles, etc., etc. So I think this sort of arrangement is beneficial for both the countries, and particularly for us because we need a lot of equipment for securing our borders from them.
Right. As far as the borders are concerned, of course, Israel is a small country. India's borders run into thousands of kilometers, and so it will be hard to replicate that. But you spoke about equipment repeatedly, Mr. Kakkad, and I want to ask you this. It's okay to buy equipment. Do we have the will to use it?
We have definitely. See, we are not just facing Pakistan. We also are facing China on various fronts. And the missile that they are manufacturing, the guided missiles, the harpoons, which will definitely be very useful to us in our with our Navy, with our Air Force, and otherwise, and learning as to how the various missile systems will operate beneficially for us. The Israelis are really expert on that. So it definitely is going to help us. The equipment, and also when they agree to manufacture that equipment with us, which is what the Prime Minister is trying to do.
Yes, but they've also expressed some concerns. You want to make a point, Ruben?
The point that you raised about having the will to use the force that one has. Israel is facing an external terrorist. In India, the problem is we do face an external terrorist, yes, but there are pockets within India where we're facing terrorists of our own making, our own citizens.
Or being propped up by others.
Yeah, or propped up, but basically they're our own people. So using brute force against them, one is hesitant to use brute force against your own family, so to speak. That was my point.
Sure. Herb Keenan, I'm told, is back with us. Herb, I was referring to a story published by the Jerusalem Post today that spoke about major defense deals being signed on this visit. Can you shed more light on that?
Actually, I cannot. I mean, what I've understood from speaking to both Indian and Israeli diplomatic sources here is that the main thrust of this visit is not necessarily going to be on the defense side. That stuff is going on pretty well without the need for the Prime Minister to come here and sign the agreements himself. There's a lot of stuff going on under the radar. The focus here, I think, is going to be on the more civilian side, water technology, agriculture, and just kind of a symbolic moving the relationship forward. We don't need the Prime Minister to come here to sign defense deals. That's going on anyhow. But we need him to kind of upgrade the relationship, and I think that's what you're going to see happening.
Right. How does Israel manage to do better defense business compared to other Western countries? Do they understand the Indian psyche better? Are they better at cutting red tape? How is it that over such a short span of time, Israel became India's third biggest defense exporter?
Look, I think there's a couple, historic reasons for it. Back in the 1990s, I'm not sure, after the nuclear test, there are a lot of countries who embargoed arms to India. Israel wasn't one of those, so I think that kind of put the foot into the door. Also, Israel has got, very highly developed military industrial complex because we need it for our own survival. And it is cutting-edge technology, and we need to sell those arms in order that we have the oxygen, as it were, to develop the stuff that we need for ourselves. So it's an important component of the country's overall strategic outlook. And again, it's based on our experience, it's based on the technology and our need, basically.
Right. Brigadier Brom, I'm told, is finally with us. Good evening, Brigadier. First of all, your thoughts on the Prime Minister's visit and how it's being seen in your country.
Good evening. Well, I think that for Israel, the good relationship with India is of utmost importance. India is conceived as a superpower, a rising power in the world in economy, political influence, etc. So for a small state like Israel, that has problems with some of its neighbors, relationship with such a power is very important. On top of that, it's a huge market for our products, whether it is in the defense area, which focuses discussion, or in other industrial areas. Now, what Israel hopes that the good economic relationship, the good defense relationship, will also develop into close relationship, the kind of strategic alliance in the political sense.
But why are the two sides wary of discussing defense ties in the open?
For Israel, it's traditional. Usually, for example, at the time when you didn't have my audio and you didn't hear me, I heard that you asked what weapon deals will be signed with this business of well, in Israel, these kinds of weapon deals are not discussed openly. They are not in the open domain. The press or other media usually don't relate to it. And maybe it's something that was left from the time that Israel had problems with its relations with many states in the world, because these states were concerned of the possibility that their relationship with Israel will affect negatively the relationship with the Arab states. And because of that, weapon deals of this kind were usually kept in secret, and it is still the tradition here.
Sure. They're talking about making in India. Israeli companies, including defense manufacturers, are talking about making in India, but they're wary of sharing intellectual property. How do the two sides propose to tide over this?
Quite a common thing in this kind of weapon deals. Weapons are a very expensive system, and usually states, when they form, close relationship with weapon suppliers, they ask for to transfer at least some of the knowledge in the production of the weapon system,
right,
to the state that is procuring the equipment. And that is true also for India. So in each one of these deals, there is provision for transfer of knowledge and production to India as well.
Right. Keenan, this was for you. How much of Make in India from Israeli firms should we expect to see in the months and years ahead?
Look, I think that to a certain degree depends on how much focus or how much emphasis the Indians put on that. Like I said, I mean, it's very, very important for Israel to be able to export stuff from its defense industry. It's going to want to do that. It's going to want to do it to India because of the huge market there. If India, demands that a lot of this stuff is going to be made in India, I'm sure they'll be able to work out a way in which they'll be able to do that, but retain the intellectual property. I mean, I don't think this will be a barrier. If the desire is there, if the will is there, believe me, they'll find a way to do it.
And my final question to you, what about China? Is that even a factor?
In what? In the arms? The
fact
relationship?
that China is doing very big business with Israel, but Israel also remains India's one of the biggest defense suppliers. So how does Jerusalem propose to balance these two, given the fraught ties that India and China have?
Look, it's interesting that Israel's relationship with China, and Israel does about double the amount of trade now with, I'm talking about civilian trade with China as it does with India. The trade with China is not military at all. The Americans have pretty much stopped or told Israel in the early 2000s not to sell military equipment to China. So we're not selling a lot of defense equipment to China. It's all a civilian trade that we have with China. Look, I mean, as far as Israel's overall relationship with China, you can juggle both balls in the air, much the same way that India now is dehyphenating its relationship with Israel and the Palestinians. Our relationship with China is independent of our relationship with India. And I think the feeling in Jerusalem is that we're able to have excellent relations with both countries. It's important for us, and it's able to do. Just as India has a good relationship with Israel, it has a good relationship with Saudi Arabia, with Iran. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. And I think this shows, to a certain degree, the maturity of the relationship, that both sides now realize that there are things that are mutual beneficial that they have in their relationship with one another, and they can put their relationship with other countries aside and just deal individually one with the other.
Right. Erb Keenan, Brigadier Brom and T.R. Kakkar, I'm going to thank you all for joining us here. Appreciate your thoughts and perspective. And this is something that we will be tracking in detail, the Prime Minister's visit to Israel in the days ahead. Of course, I will request Ruben to stay with us because we want to focus on the cultural aspect of this relationship as well. And when we speak to diplomats on either side, they ask us to focus on the expanding engagement. It's not just about defense anymore. Agriculture, water resource management are areas where Israeli companies increasingly want to offer solutions and make in India. Of course, conditions apply. The press is obsessed with defense deals, and there's so much more in bilateral ties that affects people directly. This is the common refrain of diplomats, and to a certain extent, true too.
More than 600-700 million Indian people are living off the land in one form or another. That's a huge amount of people, and if we can be of assistance in working together in creating some of the technologies and make them useful for India, of course that's enormously important for both countries. So I think that's what we're going to be sticking with in this visit and in the entire relationship.
India and Israel have made rapid progress in technology exchange in the fields of agriculture and water resource management. Often hailed for making the desert bloom, Israel's drip irrigation technology is now widely used in India. The November 2016 visit of President Rivlin focuses on these areas. 10 of the 26 proposed centers of excellence being developed have already been commissioned in Haryana, Maharashtra, Gujarat and Rajasthan. Right now, I am in the industrial area, industrial zone on the outskirts of Tel Aviv, and this behind me is the lab and testing unit of a company called WaterGen. Why is it important? Because in the less than 48 hours that the Indian Prime Minister is going to spend in this country, he will visit this facility. They have developed a technology to create drinking water out of thin air. We'll see how they do it, but they're collaborating with the New Delhi Municipal Corporation or the NDMC to set up units across the national capital in India to solve the drinking water problem, and they're also going to be making in India. So on a lot of counts, they are going to collaborate with India, and that is what explains the Prime Minister's interest in this facility. Let's go in and see what they have. WaterGen is one of the many companies that is working with Indian partners to solve the drinking water problem.
We're putting at the top of the agenda as agreement between both countries the issues that face the majority of Indian people and the majority of Israeli people actually, which is the water and the agricultural sectors, which we believe we can work very closely with in all fields, new technologies, reclamation of water, wastewater, creation of water, etc. And I think that both countries, both peoples have an enormous amount to gain from in this relationship on the field of agriculture and water.
Bilateral trade has grown from $200 million in 1992 to over $5 billion in 2011. More than half of it is trade in diamonds, which accounts for a huge number of Indian diamond merchants in Israel. Indian companies like Infosys, Wipro, Tech Mahindra, Tata and Sun Pharma have made investments in Tel Aviv. As Israeli companies look to make in India, some concerns remain.
My office here is in the diamond exchange. So in the diamond exchange, we have a lot of Indians around. In this very building, TCS has an office. State Bank of India is just across the street. So there is a growing interest from India in Israel. Infosys opened here an office, and Tech Mahindra and many other companies are looking into Israel. So it's in the business, it's in the academia, it's in the culture.
Prime Minister Modi's visit is also expected to breathe life into negotiations over a free trade agreement that have been languishing since 2014. And my colleague Karthikeya Sharma has just landed in Tel Aviv and he's joining us live from there. Karthikeya, everyone we're speaking to says, yes, defense is already on track. It's the other areas which need the focus and the energy of the two prime ministers, and that is what we will see in the joint statement that comes in 2 days from now. What are you picking up?
Yes, Palki, the Prime Minister has divided his trip into two parts. I'll begin by answering a question like that. The first day will be spent in Tel Aviv and the last 2 days would be spent in Jerusalem. Now, what I'm picking up is that the first half of the journey or the meetings of the Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Israel would be dedicated to issues like, as the reportage which you did from Israel, precision farming, agriculture, civilian technology. So the whole focus would be on that, there are areas other than intelligence, security and defense in which India and Israel can cooperate. And there is no doubt about it, for example, that drip irrigation was actually pioneered in Israel. A state which was water deficit has become water surplus because of its technologies. But then that's the first part of it, that's like, it's like beginning. The second part of it will take place in Jerusalem, and I think it's of great importance. It's of great importance that Prime Minister, instead of staying put in Tel Aviv, has chosen to stay put in Jerusalem for 2 nights. So the first day would be dedicated for bilaterals, one-to-one meeting, and that will be like meeting the the important dignitaries of the government of Israel. The evening would be dedicated to a rally of 4,000 people, Palki, which I've come to know, and I have also been told that Mr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe has flown from Delhi, who happens to head the BJP's foreign cell, and all the expat Indians are going to be there. So it's like a bit of a Shanghai, bit of a Madison Square, not that big in scale, but something like that would be there. And then on the last day, before taking off, there will be a joint statement. But nonetheless, it's like coming of age, Palki. For me, it's not about $2 billion of defense deal. India post 1991, after Narasimha Rao became the Prime Minister, had somehow, without acknowledging it in public, had sanctified the relationship with Israel. What is happening is like coming of age. It's like publicly acknowledging what you had in private. I think I see the importance of that visit in that context, Palki.
Right. Of course, the Indian community I spoke to said they very much want a Madison Square-like event, but they don't have a venue like this, and there are security concerns, but they're very much looking forward to the visit of the Indian Prime Minister. To speak specifically about the Indians there, what is the message that the Prime Minister's visit sends to them?
I think, a very pertinent question you have asked me. You see, what ties Israel to India is rise of Islamic terrorism. And Prime Minister has made it a point that he's going to go and visit the family of the child, if you remember, in 2008, who survived the attack in one of the buildings in which a lot of Jewish families were staying, and the Moshe's nun Sandra was barely able to escape from that place. So he's going to go there. The boy is of 10 years now. He's 10. His age is 10 now. He's going to spend some time with family. That boy, to a lot of people, reminds what happened on 2008 and how countries need to cooperate if they need to deal with terrorism, which gets funded by many countries from the Gulf region. So I think that is also an important takeaway. But as you asked me in terms of diaspora, see, Indians, unlike Qatar, Emirates and other places in Gulf, they are into, I would say, basic construction jobs. But in Israel, there is a different sort of engagement which is taking place, which is in terms of technologies and startups. And I was reading a very good article yesterday, and it was saying, and it was arguing that the startup industry needs to learn something from India. Israel, which used to be a pioneer in terms of technology, is lagging behind. It needs to be spruced up. So I think there one can also see some sort of a collaboration between the Indian government and I would say the government of the Israel. But nonetheless, I would say that the whole tamjam or the whole the drama or the whole the gamut of the way the Prime Minister would come, the way he will be received, the Prime Minister would himself be at the airport, will start from tomorrow at 3. But Prime Minister has chosen to be at the Agriculture University tomorrow as his first pitch stop. That 5 p.m. he's going to go there, and I think it's a 1.5 hour sort of a meeting, sort of a demonstration for him. They will be taking him around the farm and telling him, and that has been made open to the media. But then I would say the day would begin when the Prime Minister of Israel would personally come and receive Narendra Modi palki.
Right. Reuben, thank you very much for your patience. We're journalists. We tend to get carried away with our own thoughts.
No, it's interesting.
But this visit, this meeting with Moshe, that's a very strong and I would say a very touching gesture.
Yes, it is. It's a very sad thing that happened, and the boy was left alone. So it's good that the Prime Minister is making this extra effort, finding time in his busy schedule to make this visit.
We heard from the man who's essentially shaped the India policy for Israel, Mark Sofer. He was the ambassador earlier here, and now he's in charge of the Asia desk in the Foreign Ministry back in Jerusalem. And he said that there's a natural affinity with India, that anti-Semitism is almost non-existent in India, and that is what also binds the people of the two countries together. Would you agree?
Yes, the Jews in India have never faced any discrimination. They've never faced any hatred or anybody wanting to keep them at a distance. In fact, there's always been that feeling that a lot of people who meet you and they say, oh, you're Jewish. And there is the sense of, they feel that the Jews have done so well, so you must be akin to that. So there has always been a very positive feeling for Jews in India. And the Jews have been here so long, and they've never faced any discrimination. Probably the two countries in the world where there's never been any discrimination, India and China.
India and China?
Yeah.
Not the US?
And the US, there was discrimination.
There was. So when you say that it's a very good country for Indians to live in, for Jews to live in,
yes.
Why have most of them migrated to Israel? There are really, 7,000 left now?
Yeah, there are only about 5,000 left in India. But migration, what's migration? It's either they're running away from people who want to steal their money, or they're running away somewhere where they can get some more money. There's really no other reason to migrate. I mean, look at any migration anywhere in the world. Either it's to run away from something they're afraid of, or to run towards something they want. Now, for Jews in India, Israel has been an easy way of migrating to what they perceive to be an economic haven.
Right.
A better life.
I met some of them recently, and I have to say they're doing very well for themselves. Yeah. In fact, well before the diplomats came, the Israelis of Indian origin were the country's ambassadors to Israel. The Jews who went in the 70s and 80s, many in the 60s as well, they were well educated, they spoke good English, and they found good jobs in Israel. And many of them today are community leaders. We spoke to some of them. For perspective, we start with the numbers. In a country of 8 million people, approximately 85,000 are of Indian origin. The major waves of immigration happened in the 50s and the 60s, most of them from Maharashtra. They're called the Bene Israelis. Noam Asil is one of them. He came from Mumbai with his wife many decades back and runs a Marathi news magazine called My Boli.
When we started this monthly, so people here, they were no Marathi well, so they used to, some poets, some writers. So they said, let us start and people will read in Marathi. There is a lot of people, Marathi speakers. All our Indian Jews, they used to have a connection with India. And they like, the representative of India in Israel and in India from Israel. So they want the relation to be more.
Circulation has dropped as younger Indian Israelis do not speak Marathi. But people like Masil believe they're instrumental in keeping a culture alive and passing it on. Reena Pushkarna is another such figure. She claims to have introduced Indian food to Israel, says the Oslo peace talks began at her restaurant in 1992, and that she was the only Indian Israeli to have been invited by Prime Minister Narendra Modi for his swearing-in ceremony. There are also Indians from Kolkata called the Baghdadi Jews and those from Kerala called the Kochini Jews. While most of these are well integrated into the Israeli society, the recently declared Jews from the northeast called the Bnei Manash have been caught in controversy. Their DNA tests failed to show West Asian ancestry. Political leaders in Israel have accused people from third world countries of wanting to convert to Judaism for state benefits. Reports say many of them were settled in occupied territories in West Bank and Gaza and were treated as second-class citizens. The other significant number of Indians, more than 11,000 of them, are caregivers for the old and the infirm. The issue of giving work visas to Indian professionals is still work in progress between both sides. So while the Indian origin Jews who went to Israel took a lot of their culture and their way of life there, Judaism has also taken an Indian color. Is that right?
Judaism has taken an Indian color? No, not really. The Jews in India have been free to practice their religion exactly as Jews anywhere, or close to the way Jews anywhere in the world would practice their religion. But what we have taken on is the Indian culture. I mean, religion is only part of culture.
Yeah.
The rest of the culture, the food habits, of course with certain restrictions, but the food habits, the dress, the Bnei Israel, for example, the Indian Bnei Israel women wear saris. That's their normal dress. The language we've taken on is Marathi, which is where 2,000 years ago the Jews were shipwrecked. So, whereas religion has remained very precise according to what the Jewish tenets are, the culture the culture of the Indian Jews is basically Indian.
Indian culture.
And basically Maharashtrian, because that's where we grew up. But of course there are these pockets in Calcutta and another
Cochin.
pocket in Cochin. But the majority, the Bnei Israel, grew up in Maharashtra and we're Maharashtrians. So we're Indians first and Jewish by religion.
That's interesting. I'm going to thank you, Reuben Israel, for being with us and for sharing your thoughts here on this show. Of course, as I've been saying, this is something that WION will be focusing on over the next 2 days. Karthikeya is reporting from Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and we'll be bringing you exclusive interviews as the Indian Prime Minister, the first Indian Prime Minister, lands in Tel Aviv at around 6:30 tomorrow. So do watch out for those reports.